All right, Zane, I am so really thrilled to have you on. And I think you're feeling the same feeling I'm feeling, which is, ooh, this
Mm.
thing is kind of going crazy, but it shouldn't. It should just be conversation and it should be being open-minded. And I would like to talk about, we'll get into your experience, my experience, and I'm going to also show on here some other prominent people in this space, their experience, and just get the conversation going so that I know the big issue here is this is conflicting information for people and it's very hard. It's hard for all of us. It's very hard, and I'll talk about some of that at the end of the video too. But if you could, for my audience who might not know you, can you give a little background and give a little intro? Thanks.
Sure, Lisa. I appreciate it. I love the conversation. I've been wanting to have more and more of these, and I appreciate that you invited me on here. I really respect the platform, your platform here. So, I want to let everyone know as a disclaimer: things you may hear come out of my mouth, those are not coming out of Lisa's mouth. They're not. We're not doing the same thing. We're having a conversation about what we're doing. So, if you don't like what I say, don't hold that against Lisa, because we are just two people who are coming through a journey, who have encountered similar experiences, who are sharing them and sharing with you, but we're sharing with each other. And does that mean we're both doing the same thing or at the same place in that? And so it's just, and we want to do this to open these conversations, as we were talking earlier. It's like, let's have more of these rather than the ones come in with a finger pointing and disqualifying. And so my background, I became a trainer in 98, helping people with what usually became, weight loss. Prior to that, in my mid-20s, I had seen my uncles suffering with metabolic disease. So diabetes and heart disease, mostly some form, stroke, heart attack, so forth. And my dad, though, who was the youngest, but as he was getting to their age, he was not struggling with the same issues, and he'd always paid attention to diet. It wasn't perfect, but it's what we knew from what he knew from the 70s and 80s. He was intentional about his diet, and he always exercised. And so that told me, hey, there's a way to avoid metabolic disease, and I'm going to figure it out. And so that became in my mid-20s. That was my driver to start experimenting with diets and reading. And we didn't have internet. We didn't have communities back then, but I could read, ask people questions, and experiment. And that's what I did. And I started with a vegetarian diet of all things, which was often vegan. Crashed and burned with that a few years later, but it taught me about food. Started training people. 2002, started telling people about using low carb to lose weight. And of course, my back then it was like, my coworkers are like, that's kind of dangerous. You need, all the stuff. All right, all the negative feedback on teaching low carb in 2002. 2010, started experimenting with intermittent fasting and then fasted workouts. So I've been on this subject and these topics for a while. I've aged into them. And then I hit a wall in probably right around 51. So like 2021, 2022, I was feeling really run down and burnt out. I think it was over leveraging metabolic stress. My blood sugar was a little higher than I wanted it to be. My thyroid was stressed. TSH was high, which means it's struggling to convert the T4 to T3. Basically, a lot of signs of high cortisol, disrupted sleep, was not recovering from my workouts, getting injured kind of often. And I thought, okay, I've got to change. This is not working. I've come to an end of something, and I had to make some changes, which began with stop fasting, which created some over about 2 or 3 months of pretty good improved impact on my sleep, on my recovery, and then began, and later in 2023, experimenting with adding more carbs. I noticed after about 8 or 10 months, I hadn't checked my blood work, but I was feeling better by increasing my carbs pretty significantly. Didn't really change much else, and it was all whole food. Always avoiding ultra processed food, but introduce things like fruit, white rice, sweet potatoes, things like that. And my blood sugar, which had historically been in the 90s, was now fasting glucose of 79. My fasting insulin really hadn't moved. It's always right around 3 or, mid to 2.5 to 3. That hadn't moved. And so I was like, oh, okay. And I felt better. So it was kind of an aha moment for me to start digging deeper into research, into talking to other people, into listening to other people who had been through this themselves, who'd come through either keto or carnivore or low carb, and found that they hit walls. It wasn't working for them, and they made a pivot. And looking at the research they were talking about. So it's been kind of a lesson over the last 2 years of experimentation, research, speaking to people. And so I know people might, if they know, kind of familiar with seeing me around, this is not out of left field. This is something I've been really playing with for about 2.5 years and adjusting, experimenting, and feel very strongly that I have found something that's certainly working better for me right now. And with many of the people I've worked with, it's been a benefit as well. So I hope that wasn't too long-winded, but that's basically where I'm, why we're here talking.
Yeah, no, and I look at this, it's a path, because there's a place for an elimination diet, which can
Mhm.
be extremely beneficial, especially for people coming from the standard American diet who end up with a huge amount of autoimmune issues, inflammatory issues, weight issues, and trying to grasp onto something that is going to heal them.
Mhm.
And getting rid of all the processed foods and really coming down, way down into, let's say, the carnivore diet, it can be very healing and have a purpose. And I think for me now, if people have watched my prior video, I spoke about how my morning glucose was over 100, and
Mhm.
it was running 105 to 115. And now I'm only 6 months into this whole pivot that I've been pivoting. And my glucose in the morning now is 92, 95, 93, like in there. So I'm thrilled with that, but I feel like I'm on a path that it still needs to go lower. I'd love it in the 70s and 80s, and it's going in the right direction. And I'm feeling good. And obviously the other topic that I want to talk about here is, yes, I lost weight. And then people say, well, it's not about the scale, it's not all about the weight, and it's for your health. And I'm like, yeah, but I can't be metabolically healthy and have a waist circumference that isn't metabolically healthy. Okay, so yes, that translates to the number on the scale, but let's just stop talking about that diet mentality of, I'm doing this because I want to lose weight and I'm a vain female who wants to, strut around in a bikini at 60 years old. This has a lot to do with getting people to understand that this is health, and to think that I am specifically targeting this as a weight loss hack is so wrong. I will say that the majority of people, right, who come into our low carb, carnivore, keto space are doing it because they want to lose weight. And when you lose weight, you also lose medications and diagnosis, because as the weight comes down, the inflammation goes down, because adipose tissue, whether it's subcutaneous or visceral, is inflammatory and it's not healthy. Bottom line. So we can kind of put that discussion to a rest, that when people come to lose weight, yes, part of it's vanity. We want to feel good in our skin, and we also want to be able to get up and move and do things we want to do.
Mhm.
But these people are struggling. And I can't tell you how many people, I know a huge amount of people in this space, they're carnivoring harder, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And there's a lot of overweight people in this space. And guess what? The majority of them are now on GLP-1s because that became the avenue, the pivot. This is my perception of it, where the flow was leading as far as the information out there. And I think that part of, and I'm not anti GLP-1 and I'm not huge pro. I feel like I'm right in the middle. I'm open to, yes, maybe it is a tool for certain people that might really need it. And we have to look at all different angles of that also, but I'm not here to pull GLP-1s into this conversation, but I felt like I needed to bring it up because I have to be honest, there was a twinge of a thought in my head of, huh, look at what's happening out here. And maybe that's something I need. Well, I wanted to really try to explore options and explore why, because it's not a GLP-1 deficiency that was causing my weight to go up and my glucose to go up. It
Right.
wasn't a deficiency in that was going to cure. I looked at it, there was an overall problem that had been occurring over time. So I'm going to I put up here your posts on your glucose, which I aspire to. And, the thing is that it really is important for us to have glucose that isn't in the pre-diabetic range. Really is. And then I'm going to show here also, this is my weight chart, and the arrow up there is showing March of 2025, about 6 months ago, which is when I had the light bulb moment of, this is what I'm going to try. I need to not talk about it yet because this could be some little offshoot tangent thing that's not going to work. And I want to make sure the information I give is based on solid experience. So that's my experience there. I mean, you can look and see how well that was working after struggling for so long. And here's some other influencers in the space I'm going to bring up. And so this is Megan Alice, and she has a great post. I think you've highlighted that also, that she wrote here, after 6 years of going back and forth, keto, very low carb and carnivore, her thyroid tanked, her hormones took a hit, her energy was gone, and her cortisol was through the roof. And she said she was in denial about it for a while. And how could something so life transforming be hurting me now? Which was part of what I thought too. Like, this whole thing changed my life, because when the moment, where I found it, I was really struggling with a disordered relationship with food. But it was the elimination and coming down to a very limited food selection that had really helped me at the time. And I'll get into this also later. If people are interested, I'm going to do another video of how this change of adding carbs has affected me as far as someone who had a prior disordered relationship with food. But I think the other thing I want to bring up now, since we're talking about different influencers in this space who are speaking about this, I want to bring up a couple other clips from Dr. Kiltz first, and he just posted this a couple days ago. So we're going to play this.
Dr. Kiltz here. And I've been Mr. Crazy Carnivore for nearly 15 years. I felt amazing. And some recent things happening all over the world and in my life personally, we've seen some people leave us in this world, and maybe in a very polarizing way, potentially. Leading as a carnivore and only eating meat maybe was a little too polarizing. And recently I've also had a test that showed my CAC score went from 700 to 800, and my CT angiogram noted a few more plaque sites with calcium in my LAD and my right coronary artery and in my circumflex, although my heart function and my blood flow is excellent. I feel great. I recently suffered from some acute colitis. I don't know what it was, but I did some fasting. I did some ivermectin and I did some flagyl. I've recently started consuming fish, salmon. And the whole idea is that, could it be that maybe my consumption of only red meat may have contributed I don't know. I've got some salmon. I also bought some halibut, tuna, and sea bass. I love beef, but maybe my focus on only beef and carnivore is not going in the right direction completely. I'm not ready for broccoli, but baked potato with a lot of sour cream and butter, yeah. But I'm going to say, hey, listen, if you throw in a little bit of broccoli or asparagus in that, that's okay. I say cook it well and add the fat. Maybe it's time that kilts and the carnivore lifestyle be more inclusive.
Yeah, what do you have to say to that, Zane?
I have a few things to say. And I want to start with saying I love Rob Giltz personally. Like on a personal level, I have a lot of respect for him and his desire to help people with his practice, what he does. His heart for people is huge. When I was interviewing him for Animal Doc, he had me in tears. Just listening to his story and his heart for helping people, I was literally had tears and had to recompose myself to ask him questions because I could feel his heart. So anything I say, if I have a disagreement with someone in this community, it's not a personal thing. It's like, it's about, we're discussing concepts and ideas and I am sympathetic because I've been there looking at some of these symptoms I had with my diet that I believed in so much and told everyone about, and realized I had to backpedal and change and adjust my theory and experiment some more. So I don't say this judgmentally, and I'll say it with any animosity. It's with all respect for the people I'm talking to. I think Rob is on the beginning phase of his journey that you and I have been on are on, and the fact that he's adding baked potato, and that starch, right, I think is probably going to do more for him than the fish, in my opinion. And I am concerned with that LED that calcium source, not them to sneeze at. That calcium source is significant. I can tell you when I added the carbs and I made this shift, my calcium score was great. But I don't want to go down the road of cholesterol, and people have, their own opinions about which cholesterol to pay attention to and all that. But I will tell you that my ApoB dropped significantly as I've added carbs. If someone is concerned about cholesterol and you're having these problems and you want to say, maybe I need to pull it down, even before I pulled back on some of my fat, which I've done, I was just adding carbs pulled my ApoB back significantly, like 20% initially. And then since my last score with the changes I've made, my ApoB dropped back another 30% without medication. And so my doc, looking at that, was kind of in shock that it happened. And so I don't want to go down the cholesterol rabbit hole at all, but our diets impact the way our bodies deal with stress and what we do with that and the organs that it impacts. And I think what it comes down to is, for me, what I'm seeing is insulin resistance, heart disease, whether it's type 2 diabetes, fatty liver. It's not about the insulin and the blood sugar. From what I'm seeing, it's more about the stress hormones. And the impact of stress hormones, I think, is more at the root cause that leads to the blood sugar and the insulin being high. I think those are symptoms, just like the heart disease, the diabetes, the obesity and fatty liver. I think the high blood sugar and high insulin are symptoms, not causal. The causal comes back to the stress hormones. And stress will most certainly add plaque to your arteries because it's in a stress response, and it's the body's way of dealing with a fracture or a trauma or some level of stress in the endothelium of the arteries. And as far as it's to my knowledge. And so that's what I see is he's noticing, I think, a reaction of his body under metabolic stress. And in his body, he's not necessarily putting weight on around the middle, and his liver may be acting fine, but it's showing up in his arteries, whereas someone else, it may show up in their liver. Someone else might be a diabetic issue or a weight gain. Does that make,
Yeah.
that's, you know.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to put up Sarah Kleiner and watch what she has to say about her change back. I think it was about 4 years ago. She switched out of carnivore, and we'll put that up here.
So I got this question in my DMs here. If this is you, you're eating super low carb, maybe even strict carnivore, and your blood sugar is still sitting in the 90s or low 100s, the scale is not moving. You feel like the more you restrict, the worse things get. I really want to explain something to you that no one told me when I was in that exact same spot 4 years ago. Now, after 2 years of doing carnivore, my blood sugar stayed high no matter what I did. My thyroid slowed down, my energy tanked, and I actually gained weight, even though I was doing everything right. Now, here's what happens. When you cut carbs too low for too long, your body has to make its own sugar through a process called gluconeogenesis. It's basically your body saying, fine, if you're not going to give me glucose, I'll make it myself. And a lot of people say this is fine, but what they don't say is that this process is metabolically expensive. It requires cortisol, stress hormones, and thyroid shifts to keep your blood sugar stable. So over time, you end up in this state where your body is constantly making its own sugar. Your blood sugar looks high even though you're low carb, and your metabolism slows because your thyroid can become downregulated. Now, it's not that you have failed. It's that your body is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. So I'm not the person who's going to tell you to go out and eat 300 grams of carbohydrates tomorrow. That's going to feel really awful, especially after a long-term keto or carnivore. So what I have seen work is that we have to do a gradual strategic reintroduction, bringing carbs in slowly while bringing fat down to a sustainable level so your body can use both fuel systems again without stress. Because ultimately your body wants flexibility. We're not meant to stay in one metabolic state year-round ever.
Yeah, interesting. And I'm going to come up on, let's look at this. Suzanne Alexander, and I put over here, she's great. She investigates a lot of primal tribe diets. So here she says, this was a comment to you on one of your posts, that she's really appreciating that we're all opening up the conversation. And in her field work with the Hadza, the Maasai, multiple different tribes, she's never once encountered a population eating 100% animal foods or 100% vegan. And every ancestral culture adapts with plants, animals, and preparation methods unique to their environment.
So Suzanne is a PhD. She's been studying this stuff for a long time. She co-wrote Ancestral Diet Revolution with Dr. Chris Kenobi. And I've been able to sit down with her. She's awesome. We've gone back and forth with some of this stuff a little bit when we've gotten to meet at different events. And then Sarah, I interviewed Sarah for my podcast back, I think it was 2020. She was still going by Carnivore Yogi at the time. She had come from, I think, a vegetarian background in yoga, used carnivore to heal some PCOS, got her, she's able to get pregnant. But I can tell you, looking at her now and looking at her then, she's not only looks a lot leaner now than she was with carnivore, she looks younger. She looks amazing. And when I met her, not that she looked bad, but she was heavier. She was fluffier as a carnivore. And I remember that shift and interviewing her, and again, she was all in. Just like Sarah doesn't do anything halfway. She's all in, go for it, like burn the boats kind of girl. And then that shift was very interesting. So I've appreciated watching her shift and expressing that, because she's so eloquent at expressing it. But I would 100% agree what she said. That's what I've been trying to say to people, is it's the impact on thyroid, the impact on the stress hormones, which your body adapting to the zero carb or very low carb keto diet. That is the adaptation. The adaptation is to increase stress hormones, but also lower thyroid so you don't starve to death, because you are breaking down, it's a catabolic state. So you're breaking down tissue. That's what the stress hormones do. They break down fat and they break down protein from muscle, skin, bone to make the glucose, the gluconeogenesis. So you're breaking down tissue in a stressful state, which remains elevated all the time. And then your body's down regulates your energy production, which is the thyroid, so that you don't starve to death so quickly. It's adapting to your state, and it's a survival mechanism. Long term, these changes are the adaptation to the diet. They work initially. The diet works initially because you're not adapted to it, so you get some initial benefit of like, hey, my body's scrambling to suddenly, without carbs, it's doing this, it's breaking this down. You lose some weight. You feel some energy because the stress hormones are hitting your brain. And then as your body adjusts and adapts, some of those positive benefits you initially experienced will probably fade or maybe even disappear or stall, may not, but then the negative impact of that adaptation begins to show itself in the low thyroid, the thinning hair, the elevated blood sugar, the elevated A1Cs, the maybe lethargy, lack of energy, or just being stressed all the time and waking up in the middle of the night with your heart racing and thinking about a million things because your gluconeogenesis kicked in and the stress hormones are through the roof at 3 a.m. So these are all things I hear from other people on low carb, keto, carnivore diets, and several of which I experienced personally. It is the adaptation to the diet which causes the negative side effects. And I mean, just from my perspective and experience. So this is after, like I said, a couple of years of playing with this and realizing and having aha moments. I want to address that weight loss thing that you mentioned earlier in the beginning, where people are saying, oh, you're just worried about the scale. Like you said, most people get on these diets to lose weight. It's an important metric. Let me put it this way, if you had added carbs and you had put on weight, do you think they would have made, oh, look at the scale? Do you think the story might have been like the comments might have been reversed and that, well, see, the scale's telling you that was the wrong decision. But because you lost weight by adding carbs and that conflicts with their current religion, then they're saying, why are you looking at the scale? If you're adding fat with your diet and not much change going on, you're adding fat, it's because you're not converting food into cellular energy, which is ATP. If you're not, that's a dysregulation of the energy. That's your body conserving because it thinks it's in that starvation state. So instead of taking more energy, it's diverting that food energy into stored fat because it thinks you're starving, so save it for later instead of making more energy for you to be more active. And so the storing of fat is an indication of a metabolic dysfunction, unless you're just completely over consuming, which it doesn't sound like you were at all.
No, I think like that saying where you can really tank your metabolism on long-term carnivore, I think that's where I was at, because there would be times where, I mean, I could eat 1,200 calories carnivore restricting and I wasn't losing weight. And once I started incorporating the carbs, changing my macros, and the weight was coming off, I have to really think that my metabolism is ramping up at this point.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're reducing the stress hormones. So the adding of carbs elevates blood sugar, you get a little more insulin bump, and that pushes the cortisol and glucagon down. It's just insulin pushes down the stress hormones, which then means you're producing less of that catabolic energy, the energy that is breaking down fat and creating more glucose through gluconeogenesis all the time. That came down so that the food that you're eating is actually more indicative of the calories you're taking in. But so those are calories being created from within your body that you're not having to eat. So diabetics who wake up at 4 or 5 in the morning we all get a little cortisol boost in the morning. It comes up, it wakes us up, gets a little blood sugar going, that dawn effect. Their dawn effect is taking their blood sugar 180, 200, 250. They haven't eaten for 8 or 10 hours. It's not from their diet. It's from inside their body that's creating this blood sugar, creating essentially calories endogenously by breaking down lean mass and turning it into sugar. It's not about what they just ate. It's a hormonal response that's creating this problem. That's why I think it's these stress hormones at the base of insulin resistance that is driving some of these issues we're dealing with, and we've been looking at the wrong target. We've been looking at the wrong target. We're still looking at symptoms instead of looking at the root cause.
Right.
And that's kind of where my head is right now.
Yeah. I feel like, again, we're here opening the conversation, although you and I are both personally convinced that for ourselves, our story has pivoted in a wonderful direction.
Yeah.
But we're not here to say that eating carnivore for multiple years, if it's working for you, that I think I would just like to say, let this be food for thought,
Yeah.
and just really keep trying to learn and understand what else is happening to others out here, that hopefully we can prevent other people from having to get into the position of Dr. Kiltz or Sarah Kleiner. She actually regained her fertility when she incorporated the carbs and leptin reset and circadian rhythm, and she's doing all sorts of great, awesome things. But yeah, so now can you tell me your thoughts on or knowledge of the term bioenergetics as far as
Okay. I'm
diet?
an open student of it. I can say I'm just been digging in, maybe off and on for like a year or so, but really more so over the last several months. It's an approach based on optimizing energy production, or making it easier for the cells, your mitochondria, to create more energy, and limiting or inhibiting the things that would stand in the way of that energy, which is usually metabolic stress. They generally say metabolic stress inhibits the conversion of our food into ATP, or cellular energy. And so it's looking at very closely at what's called the TCA cycle, or the cycle of which we turn food energy, glucose and fats, into ATP. Or if there's dysfunction there, we end up storing as fat. That's where all that happens, is in the mitochondria. So how does the mitochondria responding to our hormonal environment, our dietary environment, what we're putting in our body, and stress across the board. And so it was probably developed or made famous by a guy named Ray Peat, who
the Ray Peat diet.
Yeah, and he passed away about 2 years ago, I think, or so, give or take. But there's several people out there who have picked up his research, and many of them coming from a past of keto, carnivore, low carb kind of background, who are sort of championing this and bringing this attention to this science, that his theories, and then bringing in current research to show, hey, there's support for this, and it's generally based around reducing, like I said, metabolic stress, reducing the cortisol levels, the glucagon and epinephrine levels, and certainly not stimulating them through diet on a chronic level. So if they're stimulated through exercise, which is a hormetic response, like a short one, which you recover from, that's great, but it's normal. But not have a lifestyle with diet and so forth that would keep those going chronically all the time. And it's in direct opposition in many ways to a very low carb approach. They have most of them that I've talked to follow a very balanced diet
There's like Jay Feldman is.
Jay's probably one of the most knowledgeable. Mike
Yeah.
Fave, his buddy Mike Fave, they're one of the most knowledgeable. And they have a very balanced, like, it reminds me of the zone diet, which you and I would remember, Barry Sears back
Yeah.
in these life. It's a lot of younger people, they don't know who I'm talking about. But his approach was like 40, 30, 30, 40 carbs, 30 fat, 30 protein. And it's not that they dial it in just like that, but it's very similar in that they don't really restrict fat much. They keep an eye on it, certainly not as high as keto, but because they're eating other things. Their protein is a little more moderate. A lot of them would say probably a 0.6 to 0.8 grams per pound of ideal body weight in terms of protein, rather than the 1-to-1. So they might have a little bit lower. They might be more like 40, 25 protein and 35 fat or so, for the most part. and they take a much more, it's like basically avoiding metabolic stress and avoiding processed food, primarily the seed oils, PUFA, fats, which they say is responsible for the beginning of the insulin resistance, which is stimulating the basically causing oxidative stress in the mitochondria, which then leads to the elevation of these stress hormones in a reaction to the metabolic mitochondrial stress, in a reaction of the brain to say, we need more energy. So let's pump up the stress hormones and start blasting more energy out there from structural. But really looking at endotoxin and PUFA, especially seed oils, and maybe a few other indicators as the main drivers of metabolic stress rather than carbohydrates, whole food carbohydrates.
Yeah. And I think with all of these, we're pretty clear here that we should be avoiding PUFA, seed oils, processed food. Like that's a given, right? Like
I agree.
I mean, here's the next thing that I want to just bring up to kind of pull this together to make sure that I'm not being incomplete is we have to bring up the topic of conflicting information and opposing views, right? So because I myself thought about this, sugar feeds cancer, right? So on the left there, I have Dr. Kevin Stock. He's a dentist. He's awesome. He's a bodybuilder. He's really deep into the carnivore space. And he says the carbohydrate cavity connection has been documented on every continent and as far as back as archaeology takes us. Arguing for a high carb diet is fundamentally arguing that a diet bad for oral health is good for systemic health, which is a precarious argument to make. Basically, I guess, because if you rot your teeth and lose your teeth, doesn't matter what diet you're eating, you're pretty much not eating much.
Right. That's right.
And then Dr. Thomas Seyfried, the famous researcher in Boston for metabolic cancer treatment, is, basically he does end up saying, he doesn't say that all humans forever should eat zero carbs. His emphasis is specifically on cancer therapy and prevention, but he does recommend very low carb intake, essentially ketogenic levels, often 20 grams net carbs a day, sometimes lower. And then Dr. Robert Lustig, who is a big researcher in the sugar field. And I just, I'm trying to summarize what these people are really talking about, but it's refined carbs and added sugars, which is what we were talking about. We don't want processed or refined foods in general, but that's the problem. And unprocessed fiber-rich carbs, whole vegetables, fruits with intact fiber, legumes, and whole grains, and protect you. His main message, fiber protects you because it slows glucose absorption, prevents insulin spikes, and feeds gut microbiota. But so I guess you could say that's not an opposing view. That's a view for the carbohydrates. But, what is your thoughts on, I mean, the big one that I get is people saying, but sugar and carbs feed cancer.
So Siegfried has great work in that what he focused on was that cancer is not genetic or a genetic mutation of DNA. It's about a damage to the mitochondria. Right. And so it's a damage to the mitochondria, which then leads to the cancerous cells growing, which it changes their metabolism because they don't use the mitochondria. They metabolize their fuel outside the mitochondria, which they're left with essentially glycolysis allows them to process glucose without oxygen. That happens outside the mitochondria. We have glucose oxidation, which happens in the mitochondria, but it can't do that either because that mitochondria is damaged. So his focus was on that. Oh boy, there's so many things I want to say about that. Mitochondrial damage is not caused by carbohydrates. The mitochondria is set up to oxidize glucose. What I think, if we can pull in some Kate Shanahan in here, her theory with the seed oils is that the seed oils cause the oxidative stress and damage in the mitochondria. And we can go back to the oxidative stress theory of disease, where basically anything that causes oxidative stress really should be our origin for disease. Cigarettes cause oxidative stress, disease. Alcohol, radiation, endotoxin in the gut, oxidative stress, the seed oils in the mitochondria, you name something that we know is a source of disease, it starts with oxidative stress. And so he found oxidative stress, or basically damage to the mitochondria, then led to a change in the metabolism of that cell as that cancer cell wanted to survive. The glucose didn't cause the problem. The glucose is just what the cancer cell is left with to metabolize, but it's not just glucose. Glucose actually, cancer cells actually feed on lactate as well, just as much as they do glucose. What produces lactate? Exercise. So does exercise cause cancer because cancer cells feed on lactate and exercise? Because cancer cells feed on lactate and exercise creates lactate? Does that mean exercise causes cancer? No. That means that cancer cells feed on a substrate which happens to be increased by exercise. So to say that glucose causes cancer is not saying the same thing as cancer cells only feed on glucose. That's what cancer cells are left to feed on, is glucose. But that's not saying that the glucose caused the
Mitochondrial dysfunction.
Yeah, mitochondrial dysfunction, which led to it being left to only glycolysis as its primary form of energy metabolism. So if you have active cancer, yeah, I think, sugar is not your friend, obviously, because you're trying to.
We don't want to add fuel to the fire at that point.
Yeah, right. But that's not the cause of it. So if you don't have cancer, you have healthy glucose. You should have healthy glucose oxidation and
healthy mitochondria.
Healthy mitochondria. All these things should be fine. It's a little too much of association. People jump. That's a big leap to say cancer feeds on glucose. Glucose causes cancer. We just share the same cell in your body. And so that would be my take. It's like, you have active cancer. Yeah. Then you need to make some changes to your lifestyle to fight that cancer. And that would definitely be one I would look at as well. But I'm not afraid of glucose causing cancer. That does not add up. There's no evidence of that.
No, because then all these populations of people that Suzanne Alexander was examining, then they'd all be extinct from cancer because they were all.
Yeah, the Tucahensa, I think, is in Guinea, the Siname in South America, the Okinawans. They have Okinawans 10-to-1 ratio of carb to protein. All those I just mentioned, they have a 75 to 85% of their diet from carbohydrates. They have no metabolic disease. The Siname, I guess they're in South America, they have they're the best heart health from people over 40. They're in their culture because they're not impacted by industrial diets. These are all high carb, like I said, 75 to 85% carb, very low fat, very low to moderate protein. But it's not all the same. They're eating different based on their geographic region and what's available to them. But there's no metabolic disease. And so it's silly. It's silly to blame carbohydrates on something that's not causing the same thing everywhere when it's in higher rates of consumption than it is in our own country. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it was like when you mentioned that, yeah, what Susan Alexander's shown is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
With Lustig, Lustig will call glucose the substrate of life. His attack has been on fructose and fructose in processed food. Like it's really like sodas and all the processed food. But he said, fruit, whole food carbs. He's all about it. And I think where there's been some confusion with diet is when people refer to carbs, but many times they're referring to processed food. They're referring to potato chips and donuts and cereals, which also happen to have all these other processed ingredients like the seed oils in them, which personally, I'm of the opinion that those are the primary culprit. Those oils are in there within the processed food. Those are the primary drivers of metabolic disease. So that would be my take on their approach and what they're saying. How do you look
Yeah.
at those?
Yeah. No, you know, this is where I'm at, where I feel that so many people, uh, this pivot, and I know it's been a long pivot for you, and it was a little while ago. It's a recent pivot for me. It's a very recent pivot for Dr. Kiltz, 4 year ago for Sarah Kleiner. I want to just open the conversation of the questions that I myself had and bring this up so that we can discuss it. Are we saying that, it's like I was saying before, it's not like we're here trying to convince somebody out of their carnivore way. It's just opening the conversation to understand that it's gone wrong for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And you have to listen to that experience and listen to those stories and listen to those testimonies and anecdotal things, just like we listen to the testimonies and anecdotal stories to bring us into, let's say, the carnivore keto world. But it's time to pay attention that long term, this is, in our opinion here, from
Yeah.
our experience, not the right thing to do. Because for sure, I don't want to be in, diabetic range of my glucose. It's really not healthy. And carrying extra weight, I was up to close to 30% body fat, and that's not healthy. No
No.
matter what you want to say about vanity and the scale, it's not healthy. So just really bringing out, I'll put up here, make your own way on your journey to optimal health, and don't be loyal to a label to the detriment of the progress of your own health. I mean, that's really, we don't want to be dogmatic. And just like I don't want to, we don't like the dogmatism of the vegans, right? We're all like,
Exactly.
and then now the carnivore community's been tagged so dogmatic and so much, like there's zealots in there, right? And I mean, I've had people attack me. I'm making a recipe and I'm using, different spices, and they're like, "That's not carnivore. What do you think?" I'm like, "All right, we're here to come together in a way of trying to figure out what is satiating, what is really satisfying as far as food, because no matter how we look at it, it is part of socialization and enjoyment too, and what is going to lead us to optimal health." And what I thought and what you thought were leading us to being lean and metabolically healthy turned out to not ultimately be what we thought. And that's what this is all about, is airing that conversation. And I would love if anybody would add a comment here on the video and give me your experience, because I've had, I'm going to say, when I say literally, over 1,000 people commenting after my last video, writing to me and saying, "I can't tell you how happy I am to have this conversation opened up, because that's exactly what's happening to me." And I got that over and over and over. So I thought, wow, this is really powerful and this needs to be talked about more. So Zane, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And I'd love to do this again and get into further, maybe as my journey continues and you tweak what you're doing. But I'm sure people are curious about more exactly what types of carbs to eat and the amounts and the macros. And that's really a great conversation to have too.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate your openness. I loved watching your video that you posted, and because it was that aha moment you're having, and then you found a solution that started working. That's just, I relate to it so much. I went through the same thing. When you see someone else do it, you're like, oh, I bet they feel so much better. But I agree with you. Let's open up the conversation. I've had people commenting on my posts who said they were afraid to say something. They didn't like saying something, or when they do say something, they get attacked. And even in the posts, some of them were getting other people coming in, disqualifying their experience and telling them they just weren't doing it right? They weren't carnivoring hard enough or doing it well enough. And this shouldn't be hard. I think we need to move away from a mindset that being healthy has to be a hardship or something that we're almost punishing ourselves to do. That's not. You should feel good. You should be more energetic. You should really be enjoying the process because you feel better and you're seeing progress. You shouldn't be having to ignore the negative symptoms or negative impact of something you're experiencing. So again, let's open the conversation. We're all in the different part of our journey, but we're all trying to head to the same place, which is let's keep health as a priority ahead of a strategy or dietary tools. Let's make the health the ultimate goal, not adherence to a strategy. And again, I appreciate the conversation. Happy to come back and discuss. And I look forward also to seeing you at Hack Your Health in about a month.
Yes.
I know you're sitting on a panel. I've got a men's health panel. So we'll get to hang out again.
Absolutely.
In person. But anyone out there on the fence, come on out to Tampa where it's warm, I mean, it's going to be in Tampa this year. Ocean's not far. It's going to be a great big conference. I think she's expecting 3,000 this year.
Yeah. And the day after Hack Your Health, I'm hosting a cruise out of Tampa. So jump on the cruise. It'd be me, Bella, Jenny Middich, and Dr. Boz hopping on a ship with so far we have 80 people coming with us. So
wow. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. Great. Look forward to seeing you in November.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care.